much do you feel that your actions, your emotions, and your own well-being impact the world around you? I recently had a conversation with Gazit Chaya Nkosi, one of the contributing authors to Life After Trauma, about her own journey of spiritual awakening, her healing journey and mental health, as well as how we can have a greater impact on our world as conscious citizens. Gazit Chaya is the founder of the Luria Center and provides free resources to help people put into daily practice the principles of DBT, Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. Enjoy the conversation. Gazit Chaya Nkosi, it is so wonderful to connect with you again. Thank you for joining me on this special edition of Liberate Your Authentic Self.
Thank you. Let's see what the universe has in store.
Yes, it's always an adventure, right? Well, we had a very deep conversation when we launched the book, Life After Trauma, to which you contributed a really beautiful personal story. And I really find your whole journey quite fascinating. Not just your personal journey, but how you're using your life experience to now help other people. Because as you say, we're all on a spiritual journey of awakening one way or another, whether we're conscious of it or not. And I see a lot of the work that you're doing now is about raising consciousness. It's about helping people become more aware of who they really are, what's holding us back, and how we can really kind of not just work on ourselves, but work on our relationship to the world at large. So you've talked about this concept with me before of interbeing, which I know of as this Buddhist concept of interdependence, where really there is no thing that exists all by itself. But talk to me about how you see interbeing and how it's helped you on your own journey.
Well, in so many ways, the idea of oneness has always been something that I've been drawn to and felt almost, I would say, even as a child, confused by the idea of separateness. And I think that speaks to that inherentness of the knowledge that we all are connected. And in many cultures, we have that slowly but surely drilled out of us, right? One of the first things you'll see toddlers play with and say is that concept of mind, right? Separating themselves. And when you look back, the idea of interbeing was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh, but I think it's something that's present in most of the world's major traditions, especially faith-based traditions. And when you look back, you see that societies had spirituality interwoven with them from indigenous times. There was perhaps a chief or a more of a logistical and maybe even a political leader, but there was also always a shaman or a spiritual leader. And so it was considered to be a part of everyone's journey, was that they were both involved with their community in the physical aspects of their life, but they were also involved with the spiritual aspects of their life. And because of many of the horrifying historical experiences we have had with the abuse of religion on a political realm, we've had this separation in many developing countries from spirituality. So you'll have church and state in the US, right? Or you'll have taking prayer out of schools, right? Which all of those movements had really, really good reasons for them to want to separate those out. At the same time, I think now you have a lot of really educated, well-meaning folks, especially from European and North American countries, who feel disconnected from their own spirituality and feel disconnected from the concept of religion and are trying to reach back out for that as we understand that our world continues to need some type of moral and ethical grounding, and that really draws on the concept that there's something bigger than myself, that there's this interbeing, and I would seek wellness and or justice for others because of that inner knowledge that it's not just about me.
And so from that concept, we see that if I care for myself, if I really look to heal my pain, it's going to impact my behaviors, and that will impact society as a whole. So rather than pointing the fingers at everyone else who should change, you're really advocating that we really heal our own pain so that we can get past our own toxic behaviors, right?
Absolutely. So, and that's another piece that I think has that interbeing component. So in most of these faith-based traditions as well, you see folks advocating not just for inner wellness, but for really morally based behavior. And in the past several decades, in what originally was maybe coined the New Age movement and is now has turned into maybe more broadly being known as spirituality, non-religious based secular spirituality, you see a lot of talk about inner healing, a lot of talk about healing your own trauma, a lot of talk about finding abundance in your life, but this is often coupled with wealth growth and really focusing on developing your own sort of inner circle of abundance on more of a material level. And I think that anyone you would talk with would also say, no, I'm trying to do it spiritually and I want my outer to reflect my inner. And what we're starting to see is, especially in America, is a shift with some of the spiritual leaders becoming more political and with some of the political leaders becoming more spiritual. So a great example is Marianne Williamson, who's a teacher of A Course in Miracles, is running for the United States presidency in 2020. And one of her really foundational campaign platform concepts is that she feels this spirituality has gone in the direction of not contributing to society. At one point in her official announcement address, she says, we're experiencing collective neglect, collective child neglect, in that we have millions of children here in America who are without food, without water, without clean water, and without basic resources for education. And that when we're in these big spiritual circles and we're talking about abundance and growing our law of attraction and bringing more into our life, and we're seeing models like we had a decade ago with The Secret about make a vision board and envision your mansion and your jet that you're going to have, your private jet and your yacht, and envision a life where you can work 4 hours a week and be on the beach. We're bombarded with these messages and they're intertwined with spirituality. But if you go back to, say Buddhism or Judaism or traditional indigenous spiritual concepts, individual wealth building, individual leisure, as you could call it, the absence of daily hard work is not something that's based in a spiritual practice. The spiritual practices were always based in contributing to your community, living humbly and modestly. And we don't want to confuse that, which can be hard for the spiritual community, with self-sacrificing, right? If you read Thich Nhat Hanh, he's never advocating for self-sacrificial behavior or martyrdom. He's never saying, don't eat, give your food to someone else. Because that idea of interbeing, if you really understand it, that's contradictory. I can't help anyone if I'm not well. But vice versa, the spiritual community also needs to realize that my personal wellness cannot be at the risk of somebody else's either.
Yeah.
And so I'm really excited about how these are starting to connect more and more. It's something that I feel like I woke up in this body thinking and feeling and questioning. And I'm really excited that the broader narrative is reverberating that to me now, and that I feel like I'm able to participate it with some coherent thoughts and some, it's specific actions. And yeah, I'm excited to be around at this time.
Yeah, this is a very powerful moment for us in our collective history, especially as Americans. Like you, I have felt a sense of excitement. I went through a period of pessimism, if I'm really honest. You know, there were moments where I was like, how could we have gotten so off track? I have felt so frustrated as I've seen what's going on in the political world in America. And granted, I'm here in the south of France. I'm not even in the mix. But every time I go home 3 or 4 times a year to see my family with my daughter. And I am shocked, I'm saddened, and if I'm honest, I'm embarrassed sometimes
Absolutely. Yeah.
to see how the level of hatred is so open now and so vocal. And it was someone in our spiritual community that said, you know, it is really, really painful right now, but we're in a time where the political, the social, the financial regimes are crumbling. And as they're crumbling, the people who are in power, who have the wealth or whatever, they're going to be scrambling for that control. And they're not going to just let it go and start giving away their fortune just because there are other people suffering. But in that dissolution where everything is quite a mess, what will be left will be the people who have a more pure, well, let's just call it pure for the lack of a better word, the pure values, because we are an interconnected whole. We are not one nation against another, one religion against another, one gender, one color, none of that. We are this interconnected whole. And so what has to stand is this eventual flourishing of what is true and what is right. And that is to nurture one another, to nurture our planet. And so as much as I've been very frustrated and a little scared, I'm also excited to see that these spiritual principles, which, like you said, they transcend all of the faith-based religions and practices. They connect with the indigenous concepts as well. And so what I love about what you've been sharing with me over the last year is this concept of, as I work on myself, I can take it beyond my meditation cushion or my therapy room, and I can start putting it into practice. As an activist, perhaps, some of us are really like riled up. But I want to talk to you about your process for yourself and now what you're teaching other people through the Luria, because I feel like what you have arrived at for yourself has allowed you to become an even more passionate activist. It's not like you're just, oh, I'm going to work on myself and this is it. Like you're really taking it to that next level. And I feel like that could be so helpful.
Well, it's certainly been a long and often a very confusing one, but I think that many people talk about their different breaking points, and I've been at many. And in those breaking points, part of what has drawn me to the spiritual always, bless you, is this idea that there's something bigger than me. There's something, there's something, bless you, pulling me towards life and towards not just letting go, towards that idea of interbeing, that I'm here on the planet for a specific reason, and not that the world is dependent on me, because I see that as an unhealthy perspective, but that I have something to contribute. And the Luria Center, in its very name, reflects that idea. The Luria was a rabbi who came up with what's known as the Lurianic myth of creation, which says that sort of this godness, or this ultimate love and light, was held in a jar vessel, like an earthen vessel, and that the light was so powerful and so strong that the vessel burst into thousands of shards of little, pieces of pottery, and that each of us are one of those shards. and that our role in our existences in this physical form is to come back together and to recreate this vessel so we can once again hold that powerful light. And if even one little shard is missing, then that light will leak out. And so the idea that each individual is so necessary and acknowledged, and it will be so obvious if that piece is gone. But then the other part, that all of the pieces need to come together, and they need to do a lot of negotiating and configuration and rearranging to be able to do that. And there's going to be some that are like, hey, I like it out here, I don't want to be back together with you. And some that say, well, I used to be on the bottom of it, now I want to be on the top, right? And so I think that's sort of what you were touching on, is that there's some ugliness in the rebuilding. And I think that's something that we can, there are metaphors and historical analogies abounding, that oftentimes creation comes after destruction. That's something that's very commonly talked about in Hinduism, that destruction is a part of creation, right? That we have to crumble before we can rebuild. And I think that's part of what we see happening right now, and something that we've seen throughout history before spiritual or political or just global gains have been made. And what I think is so exciting about this particular unraveling is that it's a planetary unraveling. Yes, we have severe problems around race and economics and social justice in particular, but all of them are touched by the environmental crisis. And every person on the planet is touched by it. So for the first time, we're really going to see if the globe comes together, because the boundaries aren't going to matter anymore, because the storms don't discriminate according to the boundaries, right? And the animals aren't dying according to the boundaries. So I think this is really fascinating, that for the first time, this Earth is connected globally and has a global problem. So it's like we've been given the perfect problem with the perfect tools. And that's what I feel like happens over and over again in our individual lives, you know, that we're in the perfect crisis and we're given the perfect tools. And that's what DBT was for me. I was in the perfect crisis where I was so suicidal that the recommendation was this severely, restrictive, high-level, intensive therapeutic program that's only given to super suicidal individuals. So it wouldn't have been put in my lap had I not been so bad off. So, that's the exciting thing. And that's the higher power moment where we see like the globe probably couldn't come together if we didn't have the environmental crisis. I probably couldn't have come back into this life if I didn't have this suicidal crisis. And the DBT really was the perfect tool for me.
So describe what DBT is for someone who's never heard of it. And is it useful for someone who's just a little depressed or a little lost? Or is it only for the very severely suicidal?
In DBT, which stands for Dialectical Behavioral Therapy, I have been on a little campaign that every pregnant mother should go through a course in DBT, because then it would disseminate through the entire world.
Yes,
yes. Have it through pregnancy and then teach it to our children, and then voila.
Yes.
So dialectical behavioral therapy is absolutely accessible for every person, regardless of creed, background, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, nation. What it is it's based somewhat off of cognitive behavioral therapy, but it does not have a dialogue component between therapist and patient. What it is skill-based. So people who go through dialectical behavioral therapy classes go similar to not any other type of class. They take notes, they receive a lesson, they have homework, and then they go back and do another one. There's 4 components. There's interpersonal effectiveness, distress tolerance, mindfulness, and emotion regulation. So there are folks who are taking it in a more Buddhist direction because of that mindfulness component, integrating a lot of meditation, which is what I do at the Luria Center. I take the DBT and push it in a little bit more of a spiritual direction. But the traditional concept, which was developed by Marsha Linehan, was developed for folks who had received the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, which has its own history and its own conversation. But what people have been finding over the past several decades is that folks with borderline personality disorder have typically had severe neglect in early childhood and or trauma. And that was my history. And I had been given the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder after my overdose. And so when I was again at a crisis point, that's why I was connected with the DBT. But what's interesting is, and this ties in with the Interbeing and with Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, is that when we have this question of why do people suffer, or why is there suffering? In the Buddhist teaching, it comes back to what we have put into our body often creates suffering, both on a cognitive level and a physical level. And why do we put these toxic things into our bodies? The teachings say it's because of an original wound that has not been healed. And so for me, the borderline personality disorder reflects an original wound that has not been healed and has resulted in progressively more toxic behaviors.
And do you mean that in general for all people who have that diagnosis, or are you saying for yourself you recognize there was an original wounding?
Certainly for myself, but I would say I'm not going to have a clinical opinion on borderline personality disorder because I don't feel that that's an appropriate role for me to take. But I would say that I believe that every person on this planet has had original wounding, whether it be just being an infant and coming out from the womb and experiencing separation from that safety and that connectedness. I think that in many ways is an original wound that is healed with close bonding in those early years, and with having enough food and access to quiet and safety, and I think that's how these two components keep interplaying, is that when we have babies around the world who are growing up without the opportunity to have that close, safe, very nourished bonding time, they often become disconnected from self. And that could be because they're in a busy daycare at 6 weeks old, because either their mom is appropriately driven in her career, or because the family doesn't have enough. It all ties in. But regardless, we have a generation of children who have grown up with a different experience than the one before. And what DBT seeks to do, regardless of your history, no matter how traumatic or how mild it is to bring you back to understanding your body and your feelings, and to do that through emotion identification, through experiencing pleasurable activities purposefully, through engaging in these distress tolerance activities, which help ground you when you're in a moment of wanting to disassociate or disconnect from the reality of what you're feeling, and through mindfulness, which basically just means paying attention to what you're actually experiencing at the current time, rather than being in the past or the future. So it's very practical ways to bring people to themselves. And then when they get back to themselves, they may have more work to do, because then you'll see what the state of the self is. We had the State of the Union here last night, and it's a reflection of what's inside of us. And that's why I continue to feel committed to America, because I know that our president is just a reflection of our collective pain. And he's an exaggeration of it, but that he is not a devil, and that we're not going to heal him through hating him or attacking him, but we can heal him by saying, wow, look at how this turns out on the broad scale. My self-hatred is just as toxic as that. And I'm going to acknowledge what's going on inside of me while acknowledging what's outside of me, and letting those just continue to go back and forth and back and forth.
Yes, it is a beautiful state of non-judgment. We have a practice that we believe that if we are seeing something in our environment, it is a mirror. It's a mirror of maybe something that I'm not actively doing. It could be something that I'm denying or suppressing that's hidden in my shadow. But in any case, we all have the capacity for whatever we're seeing, even if someone has taken it to an extreme and acted in the most aggressive ways. We, as human beings, we all have that capacity. And so when we go within and say, well, is there any of that, even if it's not that extreme, is there any of that in me that I need to address, own, heal, so that there is this collective healing. So I want to get back to DBT for just a second. So with these 4 principles, do you feel like you've talked about how this is useful for people who have experienced trauma? Do you feel like it can work for anyone? Because
absolutely,
as you know, we've talked about this before. I've seen so many people in the books that we publish, in the workshops that we lead, that they feel completely stuck, either stuck in victim mentality, where they're saying it's somebody else's fault, whether it literally was someone who perpetrated something against them, or they just feel like they were born at the wrong time in the wrong circumstances. So I see people who get stuck in that victim mentality. And as a result, I also see people who feel like they're just not worthy. They're not worthy of the healing, of joy, of picking up and trying again. Do you think DBT helps in those ways? And if you could give us some specifics.
Yes.
That would be helpful.
One of the specific tools in distress tolerance in DBT is radical acceptance. And what radical acceptance allows us to do is to be exactly at the point that you're describing and say, this is where I am. So you're done with it. And obviously done with it entails more work than saying, this is where I am. But when that is developed into a practice and you start to have a dialogue with your inner voice, that voice that is telling you, you know what, Gazit Chaya, you're divorced and you're never going to be good enough because of that. And you're a terrible person and you let down your child and your child's going to grow up with a terrible life because of it. And everybody's going to know that you failed and no one is ever going to love you because you're clearly a terrible person, right? So when I start to have that conversation, which comes up 10 times a day, right? I say back to that scared individual, you know what? This happened and you didn't want it to happen, but it happened and now it's done. And you can make it worse by continuing to hate yourself. You can make it worse by believing that it's going to destroy your child's life. Or you can say, I am so sorry this happened.
It's about making a decision. It's about,
it's creating a new habit. It's creating a new habit. That's what this is all about. DBT is about explicitly changing your habits. Mm-hmm. And those habits are primarily psychological habits. So they're that dialogue, working a lot on that dialogue, but it's also about changing your physical habits. So it's about, if I'm in a moment where I am like, I have to sit on my hands right now because I want to hit myself, right? I've been there. So I'm sitting on my hands and I can, when I have gotten past that fire that blazes up within me, and that starts to subside a little bit, sometimes I'll do breathing exercises. That's one of the key components. Sometimes I'll do cold, which means, you could put ice in your hands, you could splash your face with cold water. There's an actual physiological response that lowers your blood pressure and heart rate when you have cold water on your face. I could run cold water on my wrists, and that's bringing that fire down, right? So I would access one of those distress tolerance skills. And when I get to the other side of that, I'm still feeling horrible, right? But I haven't hit my head. So I've gotten through that. I haven't made it worse, is
Right.
how they phrase it in distress tolerance. Distress tolerance are not necessarily making it better, but I haven't made it worse. I come to the other side of that wave, and then I get out my tools and I look through, hearing my little one, I look through my choices of some options for what I could do now to try to make it better.
Got
so
it.
Those might be contribution. I might go out and take a stack of dimes and put them in every parking meter, right? Because that would be
So there's the two components. One is if I'm in the midst of a fire, as you call it, this welling up of whatever that energy emotion is, rather than taking some self-destructive behavior, we're trying to find something that we do in that moment until it subsides. And I think
ride the wave is what they call it.
Exactly. But I think what some people don't realize when you're in the midst of it is you think it's going to last forever.
Yeah. And that's the emotion, the understanding of emotions and the behavior of emotions. There's explicit coursework on that as well. Yeah. So you learn to understand. A Harvard study, I remember being quoted, found that any given emotion lasts 5 to 10 seconds, but the thinking around that emotion is what prolongs it. And the thinking can make it last forever.
Yeah.
Right? I've had people in my life who died, at 80 years old in the state that I was when I came to DBT, because they just never could figure out how to get out of it. They fueled the fire, right? Yeah. But what we learn about emotions is that, especially when you can identify the emotion, which is why there's a lot of work around emotion identification, understanding what types of emotions there are, what most emotions typically stem from. So for example, many people don't understand that anger has a root emotion of fear. So when you're in an angry moment, you want to do something that's comforting rather than aggressive. So some folks might tell you to hit a pillow or yell into a pillow or go on a run when you're angry. But what the research has shown is that anger actually comes from fear. So there needs to be some comforting of that fearful part of yourself, and to be able to distress tolerance until you can get to saying, okay, now I've ridden the wave, and now let me see if I can identify what I'm actually angry about. And this is why I in particular think this is important for parents, because when people start doing some pointing at our president, I often remind them, what did you say in the past 5 hours to your child? Because I will tell you that the same level of hate and aggression exists in almost every home with a child under the age of 5 years old. And it is terrifying when you start to witness it without accepting that this is appropriate to have authoritarian aggression over our children. That's something that really matters to me, is that people are redirected back to themselves, that they realize when they look at their child, even as I just did, with that sort of harsh, hey, and why did I do that? I wouldn't have done that to a supervisor. I wouldn't have done that to you. I did that because over the centuries, I have absorbed this concept that I have power over this child and they should listen to me and respect me and not have a natural laugh to whatever was on the TV show, which is what Galileo was doing. And that was healthy. That was a healthy response. And what I did was I said, hey, I matter more than you, right? And so me coming back to that, and however else that may play out, in our lives is the component that is about values-based living. So it's not just about me feeling happy and avoiding depression or suicidal thinking. It's about me having a set of values that can be used as goals that are more predictable and sustainable and attainable than, say, the goal of getting a better job. When I have a goal of living with nonviolent communication, for example, I can work on that till kingdom come, and I can fill all my time, and I can tell myself, look, I'm making progress with that goal. I could lose my job, I could, lose my marriage, I could whatever amidst that. And if those circumstantial situations are not my main goal, but my values are my goal, then I never have to experience that disillusion of identity that so many of us experience when we lose these things that we actually can't control and we never actually possessed.
Yes, I love it. I love the values-based living piece because it really does take it away from this outward achievement, accomplishment, grasping at stuff that really, at the end of the day, isn't fundamental to who we really are. It is about these values. So tell me about your mighty network. You've created an online app component to what you're doing physically with the Luria Center in Massachusetts, but you also have a way of supporting people who want to explore these principles, put them into action, and feel like you just described, the sense of community that we're not alone.
Absolutely. So what it basically is I send out an exercise based on one of 7 topics once a week. I originally had been doing 7 a day, and that was too much. I was doing one of each topic every day. So there are a lot of exercises on there. If you log in, you can go back and look at hundreds in every category. But now I'm doing just 1 a day. So there's a focus on each day of the week, and there's a 2 to 5 minute exercise that hopefully will encourage people to try something, but also to consider a different perspective. And then I encourage conversation around those exercises. And my hope is that those folks who are so overwhelmed in their life, who don't feel like they're not even at the point where they would be talking about developing a spiritual practice, right? That they're just at the point where they're like, oh my gosh, I am still just focused on the fact that I was late to 3 meetings and my kids, threw stuff all over the car and I snapped at my partner and I am totally behind on all my deadlines, and that they would be able to, with screaming children in the house, with dinner burning on the stove, that they would be able to look at this one exercise and be like, okay, breathe in for 1 and breathe out for 1 and repeat 3 times, right? So I want it to be that accessible. I want it to be something that someone could start to create a little bit of a wedge between that totally out of control, I have no autonomy in my life feeling, to, oh, I just did breathe 3 breaths and I actually do feel a little bit of space in my thinking. And hopefully, my hope is that that little wedge will grow into and break open opportunities for people to be able to feel like all day long they are practicing their distress tolerance and their mindfulness, and they are living their life according to values. And that, in my opinion, will ripple effect into citizens who are thoughtful and participate and are actively involved in creating governments that support people, that it would not just be about happiness.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So much appreciation and love for you, Gazit Chaya, especially as you've opened up to share your personal experiences and now this dedication, because the Luria network through the app, the Mighty Network, is completely free. So I just want to honor you for making such a grand gesture and such generosity to make it so accessible for people. So I will put the links in the description below of how you can join the network, completely for free. And of course, you can also read Gazit Chaya's story in Life After Trauma, so you can learn a little bit more about her personal journey. Thank you, thank you, thank you, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you and talk with you. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. I know that there's only so much more to come in the coming years, but I truly am grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you. You as well.